let's talk a little bit more about F1. Let's talk about Max Verstappen this time. I thought it was really interesting. I was watching the F1 on the weekend or highlights of it, and it really stood out to me how Max responded to a really bad qualifying session, right? And I know he's really competitive. Look, he is now, that's 8 in a row for him. And I think that's 12 in a row for Red Bull now for this season. And he's just winning these races not by a margin, but by 30 seconds plus he's winning these races by. So he's in, it is an incredible time to watch F1 at the moment. Although some say it's not as entertaining, but actually the second tier teams are now actually there's actually a really decent battle going on in second place. But we're in this amazing era of seeing a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity with what Max is doing. But what actually sets him apart, and someone actually, I think it was his I don't know, I can't remember whether it was a reporter labeled him as that, or a reporter reported that his team manager said that he's white hot, right? And he's white hot in everything he does. He's not just like, he's so competitive, even though he's so far ahead in the championship. They've won pretty much every race this year. You know, like they're just so far ahead. He's so competitive that even in a bad qualifying, he's still mad and wants better results. So they qualified, there was knockouts and everything like that to go through to the last qualifying session, and he was last place, right? He just made it into the last session. And so he actually came in, and so there was a bit of a rude outburst that I heard, which we'll go over it a little bit. And I got that on a bit of an update, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, went back about my day. And then later on, I saw another update of then at the end of actually it was the next day after the race, at the end of the qualifying, he then responded and apologized. And I thought to myself, like, it's interesting that, yes, a leader, sometimes we can go off, right? Sometimes we can go off. But to be able to see him apologize, that really stood out to me. That was like, that's interesting that he's man enough to apologize. But let me take you through the detail of kind of what he said with the beeps. Right, I'm not going to play it, but it was a little bit we need to censor it, right? Because he was excited, let's say. So Max turned around at the end of the thing. He said, "I should have pushed for 2 laps in a row." Like I said, he's saying, like, "I told you so. I told you so. I was right." Now, his manager then, chief engineer, GP, then responded, "But you're through, Max. It's like, you made it through. Why are you so mad? We made it through." And this, he's so competitive. He's like, "Yeah, I don't care. If I'm in P10, it's the execution that was terrible." I'm softening why I'm translating a little bit of what he said. And then, so I think that actually, let me kind of, there's a few points in this. There's a lot in this. And I think that there's 2 leadership positions that I think we can look at here. One is Max being a leader himself. Although he's just a driver, he's kind of like a leader in the team that people look up to. And then his chief engineer is kind of his leader, his boss, but they have this really great relationship. And it's really great to see that, sometimes when you're leading someone, they can get upset, right? Sometimes they can get frustrated with the results, frustrated with how things go. And he just responded by saying, the facts of like, "Yeah, but you're through, right? Like, isn't that all that matters?" And then he goes on to then respond to Max after going, "Yeah, it was a terrible execution." He then goes, "Okay." And then if the track was 2 seconds quicker for your final lap and you didn't have the energy left, how would it have gone down? Right? So he's kind of coming back at him with facts and responding to him with facts. But what I love, what he does next is what I absolutely love. He tries to he responds to the aggression and the frustration with facts, like trying to bring Max down to reality. You've qualified, but if we had have done that, then we wouldn't have had any energy left to do it. And then he responds this, but you tell me what you want to do in Q3. Let me know. Sets, fuel, run plan, like whatever you want, you tell me. So, he's responding to Max going frustrated. If you had done what I said, then we would have done better. He's like, well, you threw, and maybe if we hadn't have, there's these other conditions. But you know what? If you think you know best, you tell me what you want. And so, Dr. Rotter, I really liked this interaction from Max and GP, his chief engineer, of there's let's call it heated debate, and they're both kind of standing their ground, but GP ends up responding with this whole, that's okay, then you tell me what you want to do. How would you respond? How would you manage the communication in this situation?
I think there's a lot of lessons here. Perhaps the first is that when we get angry, when we allow our emotions to rule, the linkage between our brain and our mouth disappears altogether.
That's so good.
So, leaders are better not to allow their emotions to rule. And I know that's impossible all the time, particularly in such a charged atmosphere as a very high-speed race in a motor car. So, look, I'm not critical of Verstappen at all. All I am saying is that one of the lessons we can take from this is just be careful that you don't become overcome by emotion, because it literally breaks the linkage between your brain and your mouth, and you could say things that you regret later. The second, I think, is that these guys have a good relationship to start with.
Yes, that's a great point.
That makes a big difference.
Yeah.
It really does. If you've got a good relationship, it's easy to forgive when somebody makes a mistake.
And because that's frustration, because when you got relationship with someone, actually, I mean, let's make this personal. Last week, you and I were talking about something, and I got really frustrated about something, and you know me, and so you know that I'm not getting angry at you. You know who I really am, and so you didn't take that on. And so I would say that we had this very similar situation last week. I wasn't in a F1 race, but probably talking about something a little bit more important than an F1 race though. But yes, I think that afterwards I apologized to you and stuff, and I think it's true. It's because of our relationship that we have that we can get that. Now here's the thing. How can we avoid that getting the better of us? Because, if you've got a relationship, you can get a little bit too familiar, and they do go back and forwards, but this is public. Their radios are public. Everyone's judging them. The rest of the team are overhearing it, and even just take out of, because obviously they've got a great relationship and all that sort of stuff, and they're winning, so they're taken with a grain of salt sometimes. But if they were losing, I wonder how different this conversation would go. But just think about it in normal workplace. There's sometimes that leaders kind of can go at each other, and we hear about that all the time. The husband and wife who own the business, they're at each other all the time, or those two are always having a go at each other, and it does kind of bring this kind of a little bit of negative culture. So how can we how can we make sure that we can still in that moment be raw and be able to be open and honest with each other without it actually, negatively affecting the team around us?
Well, you can't unsay what you've said, so
Mm-hmm.
you can't actually retract words. So then you really got to go into some kind of damage control, really.
Yeah.
And I think GP's response was pretty good. The only thing is, responding with facts is not always the best way in an emotionally charged
No.
situation. So the outcome could have been a little bit different. But
Yeah.
look, I think relationship makes up for a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess people are smart enough to place a conversation or an interaction in context.
Yeah.
And so the context is the high stakes involved in motor racing, the fact that you've got to make decisions, in a split second. There's a lot of data that you have to take into account in making those decisions, and not everybody's going to make exactly the same decision at the same time, given the same information, because it's all got to happen so fast. So, look, on this occasion, GP presented some, if you like, some data, some factual information. It turned out okay. That won't always be the case.
Yeah.
Sometimes the easiest route is to simply say, "Oops, I'm sorry," you know. So I wouldn't necessarily see this as providing us a pattern or a template, but just coming back to the fact these guys have got a good relationship. They've obviously been successful, and that diffused the situation. And of course, Verstappen himself was good enough to really to apologise, because I
Yeah.
guess he understood the situation as well.
Yeah, I want to kind of jump on a point and then get back to that. You mentioned before about being able to separate like the heat of the moment stuff. I think that that's something that I've seen good teams be able to do is in the heat of the moment. Yeah, there's some clashing and everyone's going hard, but when everything kind of settles down and outside of the the heat of the battle, so to speak, in the normalcy day to day, everyone's fine, everyone's going, like there's no grudges held or whatever. And it comes back to what you were saying before is relationship. That if you've got good relationship, you can kind of go off at each other a little bit, maybe in the heat of the moment, but know that because we've worked together so much, because we know each other, we know this isn't you. Just because you're going off right now, well, hopefully it's not you. If it is you, then that's a problem. You need to deal with that. If you are always going off, then that's a whole nother conversation. But I think the last thing that that GP actually said, so afterwards, Max, so at the end of the qualifying, the last qualifying session where they got pole position, Max came in, they're doing all the congratulations over the radio, and then Max is sort of like, yeah, I'm sorry for he didn't want to kind of admit that he actually did. I don't think he wanted to say how bad what he did, and he's like, I'm sorry for my rant, he says. And look, all of these, I linked all the videos below if you want to go check them out and see the full conversations and everything like that, which is, there's a lot more to the story.
Just interrupting very briefly, Craig, the thing is, his audience would have understood what he meant by "I'm sorry for my rant."
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
there's a lot of context here
Yes.
as well, but your point is well taken.
Yeah. But then GP's response turned around and he just said, I'm just about getting used to it. That's what he said. I'm just about getting used to it. And that kind of, it emphasizes that relationship. It's like there's an apology and it's like, I know. And look, I think that there's obviously that's quite loaded as well, that I'm getting used to it is like, it happens a lot. But I think that there's also an undertone of like, I know you and I know like it's fine because I know you. We've got relationship. There's so much more. And it's interesting that they've been together for 10 years? No, what did I hear? I heard a number. They've been together since he first came across from from Toro Rosso back in. He worked with him in Toro Rosso, which is now AlphaTauri now. So yeah, they've got that history. They've got the relationship. So how do we manage communication in the heat of the moment? Relationship. That's probably the key, is how do we better communicate in the heat of the moment, is just make sure we've got relationship outside of the heat of the moment to make sure that, yes, we can manage our, we can manage our emotions in that situation. Let's make sure we also separate, what's being said from the bigger picture, as well as let's just make sure that we're building the relationship outside of the game time, really, so that then when we are going hard at it, the team actually knows us and they have a good relationship with us. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you've liked that, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any thoughts of how it challenged or helped your leadership, put a comment below, and we'd be honored if you would consider subscribing for more leadership content. Also, make sure you check out the playlist for more episodes like this.